The era of video game magazines is very near and dear to my heart. I used to buy a ton of these things. Now, granted, I could have subscribed to these video game magazines rather than buying them all off of bookstand or store shelves, but that's really what I did. It was pretty exciting. It was like a monthly routine that I would have, buying the latest issues of EGM and GamePro and GameFan and Game Players and Next Generation and down the line. So over these last few months here in 2020, and even before then, I've started to put together a library or a pile of sealed video game magazines that I would be able to open for the channel. So I could open them up and read them fresh, because it's been years since I've read some of these, and it would be cool to talk about the games and to talk about the advertisements and to talk about my personal ties with these things, and to kind of give you a sense is how we used to perceive things back when these magazines were new. So I have a magazine all queued up that we're going to go ahead and open up. It is sealed. It is a copy of Electronic Gaming Monthly from 1997, the September 1997 issue, which is relevant because the September 1997 issue actually hit bookstores in August of 1997, so it's now been 23 years since this issue was on the shelves. Yes, that's Lara Croft there. She's getting wet and wild. Now, keep in mind, in 1997, 1998, 1999, it was still very much an attitude era. So some of the things that we may look a little less favorably upon today, it was not the case back then. So keep that in mind when we're talking about this magazine here. There's also a cover story about what everyone else didn't tell you about E3, and we also have over 100 games inside, and some of the bigger titles include Banjo-Kazooie, Last Bronx, GoldenEye 64, Conker's Quest, Sonic R, Disney's Hercules, Final Fantasy VII, of course, Tetrasphere, Blasto, Aerofighters Assault, Final Fantasy Tactics, and Crash 2. Remember, in 1997, we had pretty much the battle of that particular console generation, Gen 5. We had the PlayStation on one side of the aisle and the Nintendo 64 on the other side. We had the Saturn still kind of hanging around, but at this point already in 1997, it was pretty much a two-horse race. And honestly, it wasn't even that, because the PlayStation was just so dominant throughout that entire generation. This is sealed, as you can see by the bags. We're going to go ahead and we're going to open this up, and we're going to see what is inside and then talk about the magazine itself. And I'll keep this in front so you can kind of see it when I tear this open. At least I hope I can. There we go. I think there's a poster in here too, which is kind of nice. And it's been hard for me to sit on these because I really want to sit and read them. And when we lost power for a couple of days here after Tropical Storm... where a tropical storm blew through, this would have been good reading material. So we have the magazine, which we'll get to in a second. We also have a poster here, it looks like. Oh, wow. It's a Croc poster. Look at that. Hello, Croc. It is a Croc poster, and then on the back of the Croc poster, we do have 100 issues. So we have a 100-issue poster. It's the first half, it looks like. There would be a second half to this, probably with the next month, I'm guessing. And this goes from issue 1 to issue 86. So that's pretty cool. I think when I move into my new apartment, that is going to go up. All right, so here's the magazine itself. Now, unlike some other YouTubers who I really respect and I wish I had their setups, I don't have that. So I'm going to show you some highlights as we leaf through here and read you some things. So this may be a little bit longer episode. This is the first one of these that I've done. So bear with me through this process, and hopefully you find this interesting. So when we open it up, the first thing we see is we see a Final Fantasy VII advertisement. And again, in September of 1997, just getting ready for Final Fantasy VII to hit stores. We are at a fever pitch at this point. We are super excited for this game to hit store shelves, and with good reason. We've been looking forward to this game for well over a year since we started to play the demo. It looked fantastic. All the video game magazines were covering it, and after Final Fantasy II and III on the Super Nintendo, we were really excited for a brand new Final Fantasy game, and that is what we were going to get. After that, we have an ad here. It looks like for Nightmare Creatures. And I'll kind of hold that back. Nightmare Creatures I don't have a lot of experience with, so I really can't comment too much on that. We also have an ad here for an the awful Fantastic Four game for the PlayStation. It is pretty terrible. I wound up picking this up from GameStop a year or two ago. It's just disc only, and it is bad. Joe Funk is the editor here, talking about there are two. Oh no, we're not even going there. There are two big reasons why Lara became a star. Okay. Moving on. We have an ad for International Superstar Soccer 64. ISS, of course, one of the big series of soccer football games. That, along with FIFA Soccer, were competing for dominance in that sport, so that's pretty cool. In my retro referee character, soccer is probably the one sport that I don't have a lot of experience with, and I certainly don't have a lot of practical experience with the sport, so commenting on it is a little bit difficult. We have an ad here for a Mad Cat steering wheel, as well as for EGM 2. There we go. I do have a copy of EGM 2. I have one copy of EGM 2 that I'll open in a later episode. That was kind of like a companion, almost like a tips and tricks kind of companion issue, where one would come out early in the month and another would come out in the middle of the month. So it gave you twice the EGM, which of course was pretty exciting. An ad here for IDOS Interactive with Fighting Force, Death Trap Dungeon, and Tomb Raider 2. And yes, the ads were pretty weird. Here we go. And we've got our table of contents here. You want the goods, a pinup poster. So, wait, there are two posters? I don't know. I don't see it. Anyway, it promises that there's a pinup poster of Lara Croft. I don't know where that is. Oh, no. I don't know where that is. Maybe that's not here, but whatever. Talking a lot about Tomb Raider, a little bit about E3. It has a full game directory and more, and we'll just kind of get to that. I'm not going to show you the table of contents because that's kind of lame. An ad for Death Trap Dungeon, and again, this is from 1997, so an ad like this today would probably turn some heads, but that's what that was. The N64 after 1 year, Nintendo just misses the honor roll. And it gives grades for the N64 after the first year. Hardware was an A+. Software from Nintendo, so first-party software, was an A+. Pricing a C+. And again, we're talking about cartridges versus discs. So cartridges tended to be between $10 to $20 more expensive than discs, which really rubbed a lot of consumers the wrong way. Marketing A+. Third-party developer support a C. Dream Team software a C. Media relations a D, and the overall rating was a B. I'm not going to read the whole article here. I'm just kind of surfing through. I don't know that I necessarily agree with all of these marks, but again, we're only a year in. We had some solid partnerships. For example, Midway was a pretty good partner with Nintendo for the N64 back then. But EA wasn't on board yet, so sports games were kind of iffy. And there was some other, obviously Squaresoft had jumped ship, so there's going to be no more Final Fantasy on Nintendo systems. So I can see where the disparity between first-party and third-party software would come in. Also, there's an ad here for MDK, Murder, Death, Kill. Again, we're talking about late 90s, don't forget. N64 gamers, get ready to rumble. New Rumble Pack games revealed. We have Mission Impossible and Zelda 64. And Zelda 64 is still a very early screenshot. I'm hoping you can see that. It's a pretty early screenshot. We also had an issue between Nintendo and Sony in terms of rumble or force feedback. There's an article here about the DualShock compatibility not being a thing just yet with the dual analog stick. Sony Computer Entertainment of America has encountered some legal issues stemming from the force feedback feature on their new Sony dual analog controller. A check with the U.S. Patent Office shows that two investors from Atari Games actually have a patent on this type of technology. They applied for the patent back in March of 1991. Some are suggesting that Nintendo was giving Sony the gears over force feedback issue, and Sony had big plans for the force feedback controller. They suggest they wanted to pack it in with every new PlayStation system starting in Christmas of 1997. That would have meant manufacturing 1 million plus controllers, and that would have been manageable. So they had to put it on hold, which kind of sucked. That's why we had, and I don't know if you can see it there, that's why we had the dual analog controller with no force feedback in there. That only worked with some games. It was very limited. Have an ad here for Mortal Kombat Mythology Sub-Zero. And we have more about the Sega's secret system, talking about the Black Belt, which would eventually become the Sega Dreamcast. N64 secret screen exposed. I don't remember. Oh, it's from a third-party manufacturer. That's why I don't know it. Dane Gaiden, inventor of the game handler, joystick, and assorted gaming gizmos and gadgets. I don't know how I feel about that. What else do we have here? We have an ad for Herx Adventures, a game that if you are a video game collector for the PlayStation, it is not a cheap get. It is a game that's one of my white whales. I've been looking for a copy of that where I don't have to part with a kidney, and that is just not a thing right now. But I've heard very good things about the game. We have the top 10 editor picks for the month, and again, this is September 97. So overall, we have, starting at number 10, Ace Combat 2 for the PlayStation, one of my favorite games of 1997, I must say. And even though I played Air Combat and enjoyed it, Ace Combat 2 just turned everything upside down. It was a blast to play. Clock Tower for the PlayStation at number 9, World Series Baseball 98 for the Saturn at 8, International Superstar Soccer 64 at number 7, Albert Odyssey for the Saturn at 6, Tetrasphere for the 64 at 5, Disney's Hercules at 4 for the PlayStation, MLB 98 at number 3 for the PlayStation, Warcraft 2 for the Saturn at number 2, and Star Fox 64 at number 1. So that gives you a little bit of a breakdown of the games that we were playing overall. For the PlayStation, Tekken 2 at 10, Wild Arms at 9, Race Storm at 8, Ogre Battle at 7, Poi Poi at 6. Really? Poi Poi? Felony 1179 at 5, Ace Combat 2 at 4, Clock Tower at 3, Hercules at 2, and MLB 98 at 1. For the 64, we had NBA Hang Time at number 10, a game that really deserves that spot, and had been in a higher spot, but had been sinking down the chart at this point. Turok Dinosaur Hunter at 9, Doom 64 at 8, Super Mario 64 at 7, Wave Race 64 at 6, Mario Kart 64 at 5, Blast Corps at 4, International Superstar Soccer at 3, Tetrasphere at 2, and Star Fox 64 at number 1. For the Saturn, Pandemonium at 10, Shining the Holy Ark at 9, Command & Conquer at 8, Super Puzzle Fighter 2 at number 7, Andretti Racing at 6, Street Fighter Alpha 2 at 5, Fighters Mega Mix at 4, World Series Baseball 98 at 3, Albert Odyssey at 2, and number 1, Warcraft 2. In this particular issue, we have almost like a fold-out copy of the Sushi X-Files, which is almost like Quarterman here, talking about, oh boy, Rocking Champs. No, I'm not reading that. No, I'm not doing that. Okay, so moving on. Let's see what else we have here. We have ads for an ad for Clay Fighter 63 1/3. With a Nintendo 64 controller. There we go. N64 and Clay Fighter 63 1/3, the Ultimate Combo, coming in September. So this was really on our doorstep at that point. Here's the Quarterman piece. Nintendo holds 64 Double D until the 1998 E3. Durrell also nowhere to be found. Konami set sights on the top. PlayStation 2 Type-C to be at Tokyo Game Show. Tekken 3 first PS2 compatible title, and PS64 with DVD out in 2000. That's pretty interesting. What else do we have? An ad for Hercules. So we've had Herx Adventures and now Disney's Hercules. So Hercules, a big thing in 1997. And we have Protos. So we have Banjo-Kazooie and Conker's Quest, which I believe would eventually become Conker's Bad Fur Day. See if you can see that there. If not, I apologize. I can't see the camera from here. So Rare definitely doing its thing. Now, Conker's Quest was due in December of 1997. Obviously, that did not happen. An ad here for Pandemonium 2, as well as looks at Sonic R for the Saturn and Red Asphalt for the PlayStation. You know, a lot of people kind of hate Sonic R, and I'm not one of those people. I don't think it's a great game by any stretch, but it's a game that I enjoy playing, and I'll be the first person to admit I love the soundtrack in that game, and that makes it worth playing, at least in my opinion. What else we have? We have an ad here for Ace Combat 2. Ace Combat 2, again, such a big deal. I remember playing the demo for Ace Combat 2 and just being blown away by it. And I knew at that point when I had played that demo that I needed to own the game, and I was right. Ace Combat 2 is... It's really tough to rank the games because it's not fair to compare PlayStation and PS2 games. If I was ranking the games, like Ace Combat 0 is actually my favorite, if we're being completely honest. Then Ace Combat 4, 5, 2, 7, 6, and then 3. I know that I didn't mention Assault Horizon. That's because I consider that less of an actual, like a legit Ace Combat game and more of an offshoot. So that's a little bit of a bonus for you. In 6 seconds, the computer pilot in Ace Combat 2 will send your jet crashing to Earth. Your ego will follow shortly thereafter. And I'd love this. I'd love to get this in a poster form and put it up. Then we have a Protos from Metal Gear Solid, Mortal Kombat 4, Treasures of the Deep, and Klonoa. So we have some Namco here, and we also have some Midway and some Konami. Metal Gear Solid's still about a year away at this point, but we were starting to get pretty excited about the game. And some of these screens here look pretty good already. And again, it's kind of tough to see. I really need a better setup. Maybe when I move into my new place, I'll be able to take care of that. They were saying first quarter of 98 for Metal Gear Solid. That did not happen. It was pushed back a couple of quarters. Mortal Kombat 4 came out. I believe that also came out in 98. I think it came out in arcades first in 97. And they're actually advertising the arcade game here. Treasures of the Deep and Klonoa, like I mentioned. Klonoa, another title that, unless you have a lot of coin, it is not an easy game to get. Either the original for the PlayStation or the remake for the Wii. Both of those are pretty expensive right now. What else do we have? We have Protos for Point Blank, for the remake of Frogger, Forsaken, Bravo Air Race, and Parappa the Rapper. Oh boy. If I can take just a minute to talk about Parappa the Rapper, because, again, when we're talking about 1997, think about the games that came out at that time. We're talking about Parappa, which was a groundbreaking music game at the time. We're talking about Ace Combat 2, which really was a reinvigoration of the flight simulation or flight combat series of games. You had NHL 98, which had its two-man commentary and presentation that just blew everyone away. You had Final Fantasy VII. You had Castlevania Symphony of the Night. You had Star Fox 64 that year. It was just a fantastic year in games, and that's why it's one of my favorites. And just seeing Parappa the Rapper here, again, just like Ace Combat 2 and Fighting Force and some other games I really didn't know a lot about. It was demo discs that really brought those to my attention. If I remember right, it was the very first demo disc from the official PlayStation magazine that had all of these demos on it, and I was in at that point. I needed to have those games. All right, what else do we have? Protos for Final Fantasy Tactics, Ghost in the Shell, Fantastic Four, Blasto, and Pac-Man Ghost Zone, which I believe would eventually become Pac-Man World 20th Anniversary. There's the Pac-Man right there. Fantastic Four, gosh. Ghost in the Shell, if you don't know about what that is, and I know you probably know about the animated series, or you might know about the movie remake, but Ghost in the Shell actually came from the developers of Jumping Flash, and I loved the Jumping Flash games for the PlayStation, so Ghost in the Shell was a no-brainer for me. I bought that, and while I was not very good at it, and still to this day I think I've only gotten to the second level of the game, you can still see the roots from the Jumping Flash series embedded in that particular game, just with more to it, and obviously in a much different setting, a much more serious setting as well. Final Fantasy Tactics, of course, we could go on about Squaresoft and their domination on the PlayStation platform. Final Fantasy Tactics, a big deal, and some people's favorite Final Fantasy game of all time. I'm not one of those people. The strategy RPG genre, just not for me. What else do we have? We have an ad here for Star Fox 64. Soon you'll be able to feel the full impact of space combat. Remember, with Star Fox 64, we had the Rumble Pack packed in. So we had force feedback, a rumble for the first time. We also had a bunch of speech on that cartridge. There was so much talking going on between Slippy and Falco and Fox and Peppy. It was really cool for the time, and the fact that they were able to put that all on a cartridge when we expected speech out of CDs was a really nice touch. Star Fox 64 for a lot of people is their favorite Star Fox game. For me, it's my second favorite. I still like the original. I know it doesn't look as good, but I think I just spent so much time with that back in 1993. It's always going to have that nostalgic place in my heart, so I put it just a little bit above Star Fox 64. So here are the reviews for the month of September. The first one is Warcraft 2 for the Saturn. Straight 8.5. It's the game of the month in this particular issue. So there's not really a lot of difference here. There's also an ad for Maximum Force here as well, if you want to kind of take a look at that. I won't read these reviews unless there's something that really stands out. The magazine also reviews Tetrasphere for the N64 with a 7.0, 8.5, 8.5, and a 9.0. Tetrasphere is actually a really cool game and a very interesting take on the whole Tetris formula. I did not like the game at first when it first came out, but after rediscovering the N64 years later and getting a copy of the game, everything just clicked, like the light bulb went off in my head, and I'm like, oh, wow, this is pretty good. And it was. And I was certainly glad to own it at that time, and I still like to revisit it every now and again. For the Saturn, we have Sky Target, and it is not reviewed very well. 4.0, 6.0, 4.0, and 5.0. I don't know much about the Saturn, so I'm just going to kind of read these scores and move on. Albert Odyssey got 3 8s and a 9, so that's good. An ad here for Grand Tour Racing for the PlayStation. Car and Driver Magazine putting their magazine muscle behind that particular game. I believe that's a U-Technics game. I think Electronic Arts picked up the publishing for that, but I don't know for sure. Also a review of Clock Tower in here, 8.5, 8.0, 8.0, and 6.0 from Sushi X. Sushi X says, I know this is another hit in Japan, but at times it's hard to see why. You can't interact with many of the objects on screen, and you're guided directly to the next cutscene without needing to follow the plot. The most interaction takes place when you're being chased by Scissor Man and need to find a way to escape, and even then the solutions are obvious, so he didn't dig it. Disney's Hercules for the PlayStation, 7.5, 8.0, 8.5, and 9.0, so gradually going up the scale. Darklight Conflict for the PlayStation, 6.0, 7.5, and a pair of 5.5s. It's a game that I have in my library. I found it kind of on a lark. I was doing some game hunting, and I found it, and I think I played it for like 3 minutes. I don't know a lot about it. It's kind of like Wing Commander 4, I guess, or the Wing Commander games, although not as polished as those games, which is a little bit disappointing. There's also an ad here for Red Asphalt, as you can see there. Moving on with the reviews, Ogre Battle is reviewed here, 8.0, 8.0, 6.5, and 7.5. Felony 1179, one of the Runabout games. I believe we would change that name to Runabout 2 with the next game. 7.0, 6.5, 6.5, and 6.0. With Felony 1179, it's another game that I didn't play originally when it came out, but I got it a few years ago, and it's pretty interesting. I do like the mix between racing and just running into things and creating destruction. It feels a little bit like what Burnout might have been before implementing crashes, if you kind of get that. At least that's what I think. Syndicate Wars is also reviewed here, 6.5, 5.0, 4.5, and 5.5. We have an ad for The Lost World Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park still very much a thing at this time. Moving on with, actually, that's it for reviews. There are no more reviews here. There are tips and tricks for Hexen for Star Wars Shadows of the Empire. The infamous Wampa Stompa code is here. Control a Wampa on Echo Base and use down to swipe attack. I actually did use that code when it came out, by the way, just for fun. An ad for Mace the Dark Age is also here. You can take that or leave it. There is a cheat for Wild Arms, the Heelberry 255 item cheat. There are some cheats for Twisted Metal and Robotron X. The PlayStation Underground set of discs number 2 with a lot of hidden items on there. I love those PlayStation Underground packs, and maybe I need to go back and talk about those again in a future video. Maybe I'll do that. Magic Carpet, War Gods, 10-Pin Alley, and Codename Tenka are all here as well. What else do we have? Because I know this video is already running long here. Got to get rid of these things. Remember these in magazines? Those of you who are old like me, whenever you used to read a video game magazine or get one in the mail, these would always be in there, and you kind of had to take them out or they would fall out. So here's an ad for Felony 1179 right there. You're serving up massive destruction and roadkill is the main course. Interesting. EGM wraps up E3, the most exciting, boring show ever, and this was still taking place in Atlanta back in 1997. So this was before it relocated to Los Angeles, and certainly when E3 was still very much a thing, unlike today where now everything is distributed via video, and there's no real reason to make the trip out there. An ad for Fighting Force, which I believe was supposed to be a Streets of Rage sequel, but didn't wind up being that. Again, it's a game that I think has both critics and fans. I'm kind of in the middle. I actually think that Fighting Force is okay. I mean, it's not as polished as Streets of Rage or Final Fight, but it's better than Gekido, for example. There were some beat-em-ups back at this time, and I think this was one of the better ones, if I'm being completely honest. So we have some more screenshots here. Not really a lot to see. I know it's tough with the glare and things, and I apologize for that. Interestingly enough, the M2, which is supposed to be like an upgrade or a new console based on 3DO tech, that never showed up. The M2, as a matter of fact, never saw the light of day, which is too bad. Worst game of the show. Clearly the worst game at E3 was the one that Virgin was showing behind closed doors, tentatively going under the name Slaughter and Mutilation, or S&M. This game takes place in hell. Was this Thrill Kill? I think this might have been Thrill Kill. Yeah, which also didn't happen. So that's what they thought. Working Designs to end publishing for Sega. That's a pretty interesting bombshell. Of course, Working Designs would move on to the PlayStation and do some great things for the PlayStation, including re-releasing both of the Lunar games, which is a pretty big deal. And again, the Lunar games tend to be pretty pricey these days. I was lucky enough to land a copy of the original Lunar for the PlayStation for like $60 a few years ago at a game exchange, and I paid about $100 for Lunar 2 at Retro World Expo a couple of years ago. E3's best deal, the $99 Netlink bundle. E3 scores high with sports fans. That was certainly it. Oh, here's an ad for Sega Ages for the Saturn. This was one of the reasons I was, and one of the few reasons I was sad not to have a Saturn, is that we got the Sega Ages series there. So you got Afterburner, and it looks like Outrun is here. Space Harrier is here as well. I think that Joe Redifer from GameSack has talked about these in the past. Only $39.95, and considering that games were $50 back then, getting a $10 discount is certainly cool. There's an ad for Race Storm here. Race Storm released by Working Designs and its subsidiary Spaz Games, which also released Ray Crisis as well. So that was pretty neat. There's an interview with Shigeru Miyamoto here. How much were you involved with Banjo-Kazooie? I'm very impressed by this game. Rare is a really professional company. I was not involved with this game at all. Okay. How is Super Mario 64 2 going? Well, Yoshi's Island 64 is kind of a sequel, laughs. But right now I'm working with a few programmers on concepts for Super Mario 64 2. If the concepts are good, we might have something by the end of the year. I don't think that happened. What do you think about Tamagotchi? We're currently working on some sort of life simulation game with Mr. Sigasato. Would that be Animal Crossing? Is that what that was going to be? Called Cabbage. We've been working on the game for 5 years, even before Tamagotchi was announced. What's happening with the N64 disk drive or the DD? The launch delay of the DD is not due to hardware or software delay. We wanted to have as many titles as possible available for launch. The launch titles for this system, get ready to cry. Mother 3, Pocket Monsters 64, Mario Paint, SimCity, and one more, which is currently confidential. When will Super Mario RPG come out, which I believe wound up being Paper Mario? Depends on how many Miyamotos there are. A team of about 20 people is working on this game. It may be out by the end of next year. Mother 3 will be the biggest featured game at the next Shoshinkai show in November. We'll also have a playable version of F-Zero 64 there, which wound up being F-Zero X. So that's pretty interesting. Interviews with Sony and Sega as well. Oh, wow. Let's see here. What is the current status of the Saturn, and will you keep supporting it? Saturn is the system we are supporting. The third parties are still publishing titles. We'll keep supporting the Saturn until the next time we start clearly focusing on where our next step on the platform side will be. Saturn is not our future. As a company, we believe that we will take the leadership role on the hardware side as well as the software side. It's only a matter of time. It's like CBS going from third to first. Will you bring out another platform? I can tell you emphatically there will be another platform. Again, this is in 1997. We will be highly competitive with it. Oh, if only they were. When we do that, we will bring out a platform that will be price competitive. $200 was more than fair for the Dreamcast, in my opinion. That the developers will embrace and that the retailers and consumers will support 110%. So that's pretty interesting. We also have Reinventing the Raider, the evolution of Tomb Raider 2. I'm not going to get into that in much detail here as this video is already half an hour long. What else do we have? I think this is an ad for Nuclear Strike from EA. Soviet Strike and Nuclear Strike are pretty interesting games in that they're builds on the Strike series from the Genesis, the 16-bit era, but adding full motion video, which was certainly a thing during the PlayStation and Saturn era, I think adds a bit of charm to these games. I wish I was better at them, honestly, because I like the games. I like the settings. The sound and music are great. I think the videos, while corny, are also pretty neat to watch. I just have to get better at them, and in order to get better at them, I need time, and time, unfortunately, is something that none of us have nearly enough of these days. What else do we have? More about Lara Croft. An ad for Excalibur 2555 AD. This is interesting only because I actually have a new copy of this game. And I've been meaning to open it for Unsealed. I actually had to look to make sure that I had it back there. And I just haven't had the time to do that yet. And I know I need to get to it, but I've never played the game, so I don't really know how to talk about it. It would pretty much just be me opening it and going, okay, there you go. And kind of looking at the instruction manual. Dynasty Warriors. Before it really became Dynasty Warriors, of course, Dynasty Warriors 2 was really the change in direction for the series, but that's the first game, and it was for the PlayStation. We have a piece here about GoldenEye 007, or GoldenEye 64. GoldenEye, of course, one of the quintessential games for the Nintendo 64, a game that I've played a few times, and I've never really been that good at. And it's a game, because it's so valuable, I've wound up trading in after I've bought it a couple of times, and then I regret it a few weeks later because it's like, well, maybe I should have gone back and given that game one more shot. I'm not really that great with FPS games, and especially with GoldenEye 64, I never really got the feel for the controls like I should have. But I do regret not owning it because I think it's a game that I need to give a bit more time. There's also a very infamous Gaming in the Clinton Years review of GoldenEye 64, which calls the game impossible to beat. So go figure. What else do we have here? We have something about Tetrasphere as well. And I talked about Tetrasphere already, so I'm not really going to go into that too much. Aerofighters Assault for the 64. Aerofighters Assault is kind of a flight combat game, or it looks very much like a flight combat game, although I do believe, oops, there we go. I do believe that Ace Combat 2 is the better game in this particular genre. Lost Bronx for the Saturn, which looks like a fighting game, and I think those of you who are Saturn fans are just going to kind of laugh at me that I didn't know. But there's an ad here, or a preview here for that. There's a $10 coupon for MLB 98. Saturn Bomberman is here. There's an ad for Clock Tower. I think that JonTron did a review of Clock Tower for the Super Nintendo, the very first Clock Tower game. I don't have any experience with it. Unfortunately, horror games are just not my thing. Ah, yes, Final Fantasy VII. The RPG of the year is almost here. And I can tell you exactly where I got my copy of the game. I had it pre-ordered at an independent game store. I've talked about Fantasy Realms before. That's where I had pre-ordered it from. That's where I picked it up from. The interesting thing about that game is when the game had come out, I was in a long-term relationship with someone who was not very much into video games at all. So I had to scratch and claw and really make time to play games at all. So I remember when Final Fantasy VII came out, that was the game that really, unfortunately, started to speed the relationship along to its inevitable end. She wound up cheating on me, of course. But it was a game I couldn't get away from it because the story was so engrossing, at least until the end of the first disc, and we all know what happened there. There's an ad here for Gun Z, and it's talking about how it works for the Die Hard trilogy. Almost done. Crash Bandicoot 2 is here. The Crash Bandicoot games. I remember the very first Crash Bandicoot game. I remember 3, because 3 came out when I was working for Funko Land in '98. But 2 is a game that I didn't have a lot of experience with until playing on the remakes for the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4. The Crash Bandicoot games are a lot of fun to play. At least to me, they scratch the same itch that the Donkey Kong Country series does. They're enjoyable to play. The music is good. They're tough. They're definitely, at least for me, they're pretty tough. And I really do like the setting and that jungle setting. The music is just done so well. It's too bad that Naughty Dog decided to kind of move on from that and go to do other things after the third game and after Crash Team Racing. There's an ad here for Real Fishing, which I'm not going to go over. Hercules. There's a coupon here if you want to spend $10 off at Sears. This is Sears Funtronics, I believe, and you got a free T-shirt as well. A funny Funtronics story. I used to go to a Sears in the mall near where I lived. So in Holyoke, Mass. is where I went at the Holyoke Mall back when Sears was still a thing. And I had my Star Fox competition jacket that I had won from the event like years before. Excuse me. This was a jacket that I wore so much that it literally disintegrated, and I don't have it anymore. But I wore it into that store, and the person who was working behind the counter in the game department that day thought that I was a Nintendo employee and asked me if I needed to take inventory or I needed to replace the demo unit. And I thought that was pretty funny. I'm like, no. But that could have been a pretty neat opportunity. I always wanted to do the Nintendo retail rep thing, and I just never had the opportunity to do it. But the Funtronics stores had demos set up. They were like their own little video game store within a store, and I always liked how those were set up. Unfortunately, their pricing always tended to be like $5 higher than other places, and there was never really that buzz or that feel that Electronics Boutique or Babbage's or Software Etc. had, because it was a store within a store, and the person who was always working there really didn't have a lot of information or knowledge or even interest. It was just someone who was just kind of redirected there from another department, and they're just kind of sitting and waiting. So that's my Funtronics story. I do miss those, and I miss when Sears sold video games, Sears and JCPenney. I used to go to both to buy games before both got rid of gaming entirely. Ogre Battle is here. I have no experience with Ogre Battle personally, but I know that there are fans of the series. Again, I've talked about my disinterest in strategy RPGs, so that's pretty much it. Dragon Ball GT and Tecmo Stackers are here as well. I know I could read these, but I've already gone way beyond what most videos go these days. G-Police is here. G-Police was a pretty big deal because it came from Psygnosis, which also was doing the Colony Wars series. Colony Wars was another big game from '97 that I totally spaced on, and just looked fantastic. And whoever the narrator was for the opening cutscene was so just like James Earl Jones. It was chilling. Again, another Clock Tower preview. What else do we have? Syndicate Wars, Felony 1179, games that we've already covered. There's a sports section here, which I always read, being the sports video game fan that I was back then, and even more so now. NFL Game Day 98. NFL Game Day 98, and I talked about this in an unsealed video. Game Day 98 versus Madden 98. Game Day 98, of course, implementing polygon-based player models for the first time, whereas Madden 98 was still stuck in sprites, so that was the big fight back then. Game Day 98 looked more advanced and more modern, whereas Madden 98 looked like it was stuck in the past. And it took EA a couple of years to really catch up, so that's pretty interesting. Formula One Championship Edition, Hardcore 4x4 2. Pretty interesting ad here for, it looks like NHL Powerplay 98, a series of games that I really should play, and I just haven't. I think this is from Radical Entertainment, but I don't remember off the top of my head. Kart World Series and Cool Borders 2, another game from 1997 that I found out about through a demo disc. And even though I stunk at it, I still went and bought the game because I played the demo and I liked it. Reviews here for MLB 98, a pair of 9s. There are only 2 reviewers for each of these. Manx TT Superbike got a 6.5 and a 7.0. F1 Pole Position for the N64 got a 6 and a 7. And then World Series Baseball 98 got a pair of 8s. So MLB 98 was really the big game that time, or at this particular time. Just to go over the reviews really quick. Craig Kajawa said, I've been complaining for a while that there isn't a great PlayStation baseball game, but after years of waiting, MLB 98 finally delivers. Sony's new baseball game is fast-paced, straightforward, and most importantly, fun. It plays well in both its arcade and simulation modes. The 3D graphics are excellent. Baseball players animate gracefully, the stadiums are authentic, and the screen scrolls around the field smoothly. There's also plenty of features and options to give MLB 98 depth. Simply put, baseball fans shouldn't be without this title. And in years to come, we would get Vin Scully doing play-by-play for the MLB series, which was a big deal because Vin didn't do a lot of play-by-play, and that certainly added some credibility and a level of authenticity to the game. There's some letters to the editor here, including, this is pretty interesting. Dear EGM, is there any chance that Working Designs is ever going to come out with Lunar for the PlayStation? The Lunar series was definitely the best RPGs that was ever on the Sega systems. From a prodigy.com email address. The answer, earlier this year, we probably would have told you no way, but with the recent goings-on between Sega and Working Designs, things are now different. As of this writing, Lunar Silver Star Story will be Working Designs' last game for the Saturn. It's very unlikely the game will come out on other consoles, whoops, but we can't rule that possibility. Lunar 2 Remake and Lunar 3, which is in the planning stages now, boo-hoo, are candidates for the PlayStation or even Sega's Durrell, but the 2 Lunar games are definitely not coming out on the Saturn. Of course, I don't think that the Lunar game came out for Saturn. I think it came out for the PlayStation instead, and we got Lunar 2, but Lunar 3 I don't even think became a thing. Street Fighter 3 debate, I'm not getting into that. A no-win situation. So this is where people would write in and complain. Dear EGM, you guys are covering the PlayStation way too much. I wish you had more information on the PlayStation, says another person. Another person writes, your reviews of Sega Saturn games are the most pathetic, biased reviews I've ever seen. Nothing pleases you if it's for the Saturn. These games always get low scores. And then for another person, how much exactly does Sega pay you to favor the Saturn, which you obviously do? So see, even before the internet was really a thing, people, gaming fans, were still annoying even back then. What else do we have? More letters to the editor. I'm not going to do any more of those. And to top it off, we have a look at the October 97 issue. And the feature story is on Final Fantasy VII, in which they're going to blow out in that issue. Looks like there's a screenshot here for Street Fighter EX Plus Alpha, which is one of my favorite games. And that is a look as we finish up with the World Series Baseball 98 for the Saturn on the back. So that's a look at EGM September 1997. Now, I just made a 45-minute video on a magazine that is 130 pages long. And we would just read these magazines from stem to stern, from cover to cover, and just drool over the screenshots and read every word and get excited for the games that would come out. And I can't tell you how much different it is now with everything on the computer, and we get gaming information on a daily basis. Back then, we had magazines. We got it like monthly or maybe bi-monthly if we got something new in EGM2, for example. And sometimes the features would be different between EGM or GamePro or video games and computer entertainment, and the list goes on. But we were excited to get these. These were a great way to learn about games, to get all of the information that we needed in one place. The behind-the-scenes stuff, the previews, the reviews, the tips and tricks, all of the funny advertisements. We'd get those all in one place for whatever the price was. I think this was $5 you would get a magazine like this. So I probably spent about $35 a month on magazines, and that would go up when the official PlayStation magazine came out, and those are more expensive. And I miss this era terribly, I'll be honest. When I do more of these videos and I open more of these, and obviously I'm going to have to do these sparingly because they take a long time, but it's a blast looking in these and kind of having stories flood back to the front of my mind about the games that were new back then or that were still in the preview phase, and in the memories that I have of those, and then getting the games and how excited I was. I can feel that now, looking at like Parappa the Rapper, for example. I remember playing that in the demo phase, or Fighting Force, or Ace Combat 2, which I totally spaced on. It's a fantastic thing to be able to go back in time and look at these magazines. And they're a neat little time capsule to remind you of how things used to be, before the internet kind of made everything instant. So that's it for this episode. I appreciate you watching, whether you only watched a minute or whether you made it through the whole 46 plus. This is probably the longest video I have done that hasn't been a stream. We have more to do. Gosh, I probably have like 20 more magazines to get to, and we will do them all so that I can open them up and read them off camera as well, and relive those memories one more time. Until the next time, my friends, please take care of yourselves and each other, especially during these tough times of crisis. I'm thankful for you all, and we'll do it again soon. See ya.